This is Family Altar Forum 465. The title is The Altar Worship. The Altar Worship. This is John Joe Elias, your facilitator. I'm pleased to do that, and I welcome you to this podcast or this homily. If you are listening to us for the first time, we encourage you to subscribe so that every time we produce a new podcast, YouTube will be able to inform you at the comfort of your phone, computer, or tablet. In case you have subscribed, I trust that you have continued to enjoy our labors. It is our desire that you continue to recommend this Family Altar Forum to others so that they can enjoy our 15 minutes podcast, homily, biblical sermons, homilies, and insights that are given on this podcast program. Welcome, and let's share together about the altar worship. We begin by defining what an altar is. This is spelled A-L-T-A-R, not E-R, but L-A-T-A-R, altar. And the word altar in Hebrew means Mizbeah, which stands as a place of slaughter or sacrifice. And these altars were made either of earth, that is soil, as in Exodus chapter 20 and 24, or were made out of stone, as in Exodus 20, verse 25. They exerted in conspicuous places, or they were erected in conspicuous places, as in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 9, Ezekiel chapter 6 and verse 3, 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 8 and 12, as well as chapter 16 and verse 4. As I said earlier on, these were places like fireplaces that had been erected for sacrifice. This is in specific sacrificing animals to God by the children of Israel, beginning right from Abraham. But before we look at the works of Abraham concerning altar worship, allow us to read from Exodus chapter 20 and verse 22 to 26. I'll read. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourself that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. You remember this particular chapter is after God had given to Moses and by extension the children of Israel the 10 commandments. Towards the end of the revelation or the encounter between God and the Israelites, now God issues instructions and tells them that they must not have any other gods made of gold or silver. They should only have Him as their God, the living God. Today we would say, do not make anything that is in the likeness of God, not only in terms of physicality, but also in terms of veneration, that we wouldn't be befitting our worship of God when we have some things that we value more than God. It could be your job, could be your spouse, it could be your children, it could be something that you value and you put before your living God. It's an idol. Though it may not be gold or silver or carvings or a curio, it is still a God before you and Him. Verse 24 says, make an altar of earth for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep, your goats, and your cattle. Whenever I cause my name to be honored, I will come and I will bless you. God Himself instructed Moses and the children of Israel to make an altar of earth in which they would come and sacrifice their animals unto God. Verse 25 says, if you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed on it. This means that there were specific instructions to Moses and the children of Israel on what kind of an altar that they would raise. If it was made of stones, those stones would not be dressed up. They would be stones that are rough and have shapelessness. No man was to shape them, meaning that man's contribution to the stones were not required by God. It had to be stones that are not dressed. And then the other instruction was, no man would step on the altar, because the altar was specifically used to sacrifice animals unto God. But then now we look at our father Abraham, what he did when it comes to the altar. Here in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, we look at Genesis chapter 12 and we see Abraham building up an altar. Let's read Genesis 12 and verse 4. So Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions and they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will bring or give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared unto him. God appears to Abraham at Shechem, and Abraham builds an altar before the Lord, who had appeared to him, maybe for a memorial that he had had an encounter with God. In other words, the altar that Abraham had built was for worship at this particular time. It was for worship. Then let's go on and read verse 8, which says, from there Abraham went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Verse 8 gives us a little more details than verse 7, that as at Bethel, which means the house of God, Abraham built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord. That is worship. Maybe it entailed some prayers. Maybe it entailed some worship. Calling upon the name of the Lord could mean either prayer or worship. So at this particular time, Abraham was not sacrificing animals on this particular altar, but we have seen he would call upon the name of the Lord. Let's jump over to chapter 13, verse 1 to 3 says, so Abram went up from Egypt to Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and there, or where he had built an altar, there Abram called on the name of the Lord. That confirms that at this particular time, the altar that Abraham had made was to worship God, was to call upon the name of the Lord. Let's move on to chapter 13 and verse 18, which says, so Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Right here in this podcast, our focus is on this altar that were built by Father Abraham. He built the altar as a memorial. He built the altars and called upon the name of the Lord. Hence our title, The Altar of Worship. The altars that were being done at this initial time, they were to worship the Lord. They were to bring this indelible memory that God has appeared unto Father Abraham. The altar was not for sacrifice at this particular time, like it was with Moses and the children of Israel. The altars were for worship and memory of God's revelation to Father Abraham. So whenever we have an altar today, we could call it an auditorium, we could call it a church building, we could call it a place of worship, or that is called church, should be a place of worship, calling upon the name of the Lord. Until we meet again, Maranatha. Amen.